I first want to let people know that I'm going to be talking about suicide. Nothing explicit, so is Greg later on. And I will be purposefully vague about details, but if you need to opt out, now would be a good time to do that. Years ago, a parent brought a child to therapy. But just to be clear, I'm changing some specifics to protect their identity. I will call them Jesse, but not this Jesse, obviously. They were in middle school. The parent wanted help for their child's depression and anxiety. Over time, I learned that they'd been abused for years, not by their parents. They were understandably having difficulty with school, social life, and were self-harming. During our sessions, I often began with a brief depression survey to gauge how they were doing. After the depression survey, I would ask if they were having any suicidal thoughts, if they had plans, etc. Generally, I felt they were managing pretty well, but one day they told me they had the means to carry out their suicide, which was new information. I decided to call 911 and ask for suicide intervention assistance. At the time, there was no 988, National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. I also called their parent, who was waiting in a car outside the clinic, and let them know. A mental health specialist with the police arrived and did a terrific job. The police officer did a further assessment and escorted the parent and the child back to their home and removed the harmful items the child had been collecting. Days later, the parents called and said the police did a really nice job as well. As my client and I sat waiting for the police to arrive, we kept talking. They asked me over and over why I was doing this. I explained my reasoning and that I felt they were in danger and that I had an obligation to prevent their suicide. They were certainly bright enough to know what I was saying, but they couldn't believe I had taken them seriously. They continued to be my client for many years, and we often discussed a question I used to ask in the depression survey. Is life worth living? We discussed this from her family's religious background, from a humanist perspective, and just whatever they were thinking about on each occasion I asked. I wanted them to explore the question from many angles. Eventually, they came to a point in their life they felt they no longer required therapy, and we said goodbye. Then, after several years of not hearing from them, they sent me this text, which was actually just a couple months ago. Hi, Richard. It's Jesse. I lost your email. I just wanted to let you know that I'm starting my new job next week, working with youth. I hope to go back to graduate school and be a therapist for LGBTQ and disabled folks. I think intersectionalities bleed into trauma. I also got engaged and got a house last December. I don't know. I just feel like I never had an answer to your question. But yes, life is worth living. I let them know how thrilled I was and offered my congratulations for so many achievements and milestones they had accomplished in their life. I couldn't be happier that they had found a light in the darkness. After so many years, after overcoming so many obstacles, they finally could answer, yes, life is worth living.
Our reading today is from the book Stubborn Grace, Faith, Mental Illness, and Demanding a Blessing by UU minister Reverend Kate Landis. In my life, I have received this big, engulfing, no questions asked love. From old church ladies who winced at my blue hair but loved me anyway. From my, do we have to talk about feelings, little brother, when I was shattered into depressed, weeping shards on the kitchen floor and he sat beside me. From seminary friends, after I told them, terrified, that I wondered if a person with my mental health history should be a minister. And they said, hell yes. from church board members after I shoved my foot halfway down my throat, from nurses in the psych ward. I am broken, yet beloved. In all the moments when I needed love, but didn't deserve it, hadn't earned it, couldn't appreciate it, love enveloped me, a bounty without end. Have you ever had a song that you'd heard before hit you in an entirely new way? I had that experience with the Beatles' Let It Be. I heard it on a podcast a couple of years ago and really listened to it. It moved me in a way I'd never experienced. So I bought the song and put it on repeat. I drove around for the next few days, singing along and crying. I don't recommend that, but that's where I was. There's so much I love about that song. The simple, stirring piano chords that open it, the refrain that feels like a prayer, Billy Preston's organ fill and George Harrison's guitar solo. It's a beautiful song, and one that I knew well and never gave its due. I was moved by the whole song, but it's the third verse that gutted me. And when the night is cloudy, there is still a light that shines on me. Shine until tomorrow, let it be. My younger brother Bart died of suicide in 2010. At the time, I didn't cry much, if at all. I was overwhelmed by the enormity of his death, by the shock, the tragedy, and the horror of it. But it was more than that. I was numb to his death because I was just generally numb. Feeling my feelings, let alone expressing them, was not something I'd figured out how to do well, especially hard, sad, scary feelings. It's much easier now for me to feel the feelings I used to avoid. And now, when Paul McCartney sings those words, I am undone. Because in Bart's cloudy night, in his darkest time, he did not see a shining light, and he could not find a way to shine even one more day. And that still breaks my heart. And when the night is cloudy, there is still a light that shines on me. Shine until tomorrow, let it be. I find that lyric to be a beautiful distillation of a really important idea. What is the light I need in my cloudy night? What can sustain us, hold us, help us make it through our own dark times? What do each of us need to be able to shine until tomorrow? That is a question that feels even more important these days. As you are likely aware, we're experiencing a mental health crisis in this country and globally. In the United States, in 2020, 1 in 5 adults experienced mental illness, with 1 in 20 adults experiencing serious mental illness. In the first year of the pandemic, the global prevalence of anxiety and depression increased by 25%. And in 2021, 42% of high schoolers reported experiencing persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness, with 22% seriously considering attempting suicide. These numbers suggest that we all know someone who struggles with mental health issues, that our children or their friends could be struggling with their mental health, and that if we ourselves are in that struggle, we are far from alone. Before I talk about what we as Unitarian Universalists can do about this complex and challenging situation, I want to state what I hope is obvious. If someone is in severe distress or in need of medical or psychiatric help, we will not be able to give them what they need at coffee hour. The thoughts and advice that follow are intended to make our congregation even more welcoming, including to people experiencing mental health struggles. It's not intended to enable us to provide care for someone who needs professional help. I see our congregation as a deep well of love and hope, and a beacon of light. I believe that gives us the ability to be the light that shines for others, that shines in good times and in hard times. It is also true that talking about mental health can be hard. Hard to know what to say to someone who is in the struggle. Hard to speak up if we are in the struggle. I know it's something that I can get better at. In the book, Held, Showing Up for Each Other's Mental Health, UU Community Minister Barbara Myers relates her own challenges and suggests how congregations can be supportive of people struggling with mental health challenges. She calls out 4 of our UU principles as being of particular importance to those struggling with their mental health. She writes, first, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. A person with mental health difficulties can sometimes doubt their own worth. This principle assures them we believe all people have worth. Second, justice, equality, and compassion in human relationship. The word compassion comes from the Latin for suffer with. The ability to suffer with another is the foundation of much mental health support. Third, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregation. To live and thrive, people need a safe and caring place where they are accepted and encouraged to grow. And fourth, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. This principle can encourage people to create a spiritual structure that works for them within the support of a religious community. I've known these principles for years, and I never thought about them as a call to support each other in our mental health struggles, to look at the person I shake hands with at the start of service, that I drink coffee or teach or serve on a committee with, and be deeply curious about how they're doing, or signaling that I am a safe person for them to be real with. I believe that each of us has the ability to create a safe space, to be a safe space for conversations about our mental health. But wanting to be good allies for each other is not the same as knowing how to be good allies for each other. I didn't know my brother was struggling with depression. And if I did, I don't think I would have been able to show up in the way that he needed. I just didn't know how. Journalist and author David Brooks had a column in the New York Times on February 9th of this year entitled, "How Do You Serve a Friend in Despair?" In it, he writes of the loss of his close friend Pete to suicide. He writes, "It is only later that I read when you give a depressed person advice on how to get better, there's a good chance all you're doing is telling that person you just don't get it." I tried to remind Pete of all the wonderful blessings he enjoyed, what psychologists call positive reframing. I've since read that this might make sufferers feel even worse about themselves for not being able to enjoy all the things that are palpably enjoyable. I learned very gradually that a friend's job in these circumstances is not to cheer the person up. It's to acknowledge the reality of their situation. It's to hear, respect, and love the person, to show the person you haven't given up on them, that you haven't walked away. I can absolutely see myself taking the same approach as David Brooks and being equally off the mark. Or honestly, I might just avoid the conversation entirely. In Held, Barbara Myers offers this advice. Sometimes we avoid trying to help someone with mental health problems because we don't know what to do or say. We worry we're not qualified to help and might make the situation worse. But the most powerful thing we can do is the easiest thing. Just be present. Just listen. Sometimes that's all it takes to make a difference. I experienced this version of being heard right here in this community. After my divorce a few years ago, I was really struggling. I was unsure of the choices I made, work was slow, and I was spiraling into debt. After a disappointing meeting, I had to come to Oregon City. It was late summer, and we were gearing up for religious education classes. So I stopped by the church to pick something up. I ran into Mary, our director of religious education, my Sunday school boss. She was working in her office, and as one often does, she asked how I was doing. I paused before answering, recognized her as the kind, compassionate, trustworthy person that she is, and I told her the truth. I said I was freaked out, terrified, not sure how I was going to keep it together. I stood in her office, crying, and really answered the question. I wasn't fine, and I didn't pretend to be. I don't remember the words she said, only that her response was measured and quiet. She didn't try to solve my problems or tell me everything was going to be okay. She just listened. She acknowledged my feelings. She had empathy for me, and that was it. Her simple act of listening, of holding space, seeing me and acknowledging me warmly, had a big impact on me. I felt better, and I felt encouraged to take that risk more often, to take the chance, tell the truth, and let myself be seen and known a little bit more. This same approach works with our youth. With 42% of teens struggling with hard feelings, there's a good chance that any you encounter will have experienced these challenges. The psychologist Lisa D'Amour, author of Untangled, Guiding Teenage Girls Through the 7 Transitions into Adulthood, gave the following advice in her recent Times interview. She said, "Usually, all teens need from us are 2 things. One is curiosity, to take an interest in what they're sharing, to ask questions. The other is empathy, letting them know that we're sorry they feel that way." She continues, "We have excellent scientific evidence that the mere act of putting unwanted feelings into words reduces the sting of that emotion. So when it's 9 at night and your teenager is standing in front of you, suddenly describing that they are feeling very anxious or unhappy or frustrated, the most essential thing to remember is that they are already on their way to feeling better because they put those emotions into words." I love learning that talking about our feelings is scientifically proven to help us feel better about our situation. Because talking to each other is something that we all do. It's something we do here every time we gather. And I think that there is more that we can do to make it easier to talk about hard topics, to let everyone know that this is a safe space, that our feelings will be valued and held here. I wanted to find a way that I can signal that I welcome these kind of conversations, a code word or a handshake that we can adopt to let each other know that we welcome real conversations about how we're doing. Sheryl Sandberg, the former chief operating officer of Facebook, experienced the loss of her husband in 2015. 2 years later, in an interview with Business Insider, she said, "I used to think that if someone was going through something hard, if I brought it up, I was reminding them. You can't remind me I lost Dave. You can't remind someone their child is sick. You can't remind someone their dad went to jail or their mom is in trouble or they just lost their job. It's not possible to remind anyone of that. They know that. So when people didn't say anything, it just felt like there was this huge elephant following me everywhere." She was speaking about grieving, but I think her words apply equally well to talking about mental health. She had specific advice I thought could be a signal we can all use to welcome each other into these conversations. She suggests that we change our standard greeting question from "How are you?" to "How are you today?" In that interview, she said, "For me, acknowledging that people are going through hard things is one of the big lessons of a horrible experience. After my husband died, I found the standard American greeting of "How are you?" to be a really hard question to answer. You know, how are you? Not good. No one says that. When people are really suffering, and we know they're suffering, the question can be a difficult one. Inadvertently, I think without anyone meaning it, it can communicate a lack of empathy. How are you? Well, I just had chemo this morning. How are you? Well, my child's about to die. It's a very hard question for people to answer and not have the pain they're going through acknowledged. So, how are you today has this implicit, I get it. You're going through something hard and you're living day to day. And it's a much kinder question. How are you today? When I remember to ask it that way, it puts me in a different mindset, one of deeper curiosity. And hearing that signals for me a different kind of curiosity in the asker. It can shake me out of my standard response and prompt me to ask myself, how am I? Really? Right here, right now. It tells me the person standing in front of me is opening themselves to hear more than just my default answer. There is safety in the pat response of, I'm fine. There's comfort, but not connection or relief. How are you today might be what I need to hear to take a chance and open myself a little bit more when I reply. A beautiful thing about encouraging these kind of conversations is that they can allow us to be the light that shines on someone during their cloudy night, or to feel that light shining on us. In 2018, Brene Brown wrote an article for her website about the death by suicide of Anthony Bourdain and Kate Spade. In it, she writes, "Everyone has a story or a struggle that will break your heart." You would think the universal nature of struggle would make it easier for us all to ask for help, but in a culture of scarcity and perfectionism, there can still be so much shame around reaching out, especially if we're not raised to understand the irreducible nature of human need. She concludes the article saying, "To know pain is human. To need is human. And no amount of money, influence, resources, or sheer determination will change our physical, emotional, or spiritual dependence on others." Many of us are willing to extend a helping hand, but we're very reluctant to reach out for help when we need it ourselves. It's as if we've divided the world into those who offer help and those who need help. The truth is, we are both. Need is the most beautiful compact between humans. We are both. We are the people who want to help, and we are the people who need help. We are the light for others, and we need the light of others. Here in this beloved community and the rest of our lives, let's make space for deeper conversations. Knowing that talking in and of itself is a step towards healing, let's signal that we welcome the conversation, that we want to connect, hold space, and be present. Take a chance to be the light in someone's cloudy night, or let someone be the light in yours. May it be so.